Hi everyone, welcome to this week's video. This week we are going to be having a look at one of my favourite spring flowers, which is the tulip. So the fantastic thing about tulips is that there are so many different varieties and colours. There's something for everyone, and you can grow really different varieties. That's what I really love. I love the double ones, I love the fringed ones. Love the parrot ones. I love something a little bit different. And some of them even have a little bit of fragrance as well. And I also love tulips because they have different flowering periods. So there are early tulips, there are mid-season tulips, and there are late-season tulips. So some will flower for you really early at the beginning of April, some will flower for you kind of April, May time, and some will flower for you mid to late May. So that gives you a good several weeks of constant tulips, which is fantastic. So it's just learning to buy the right ones if you're wanting a good period of blooms. So in the summertime and early autumn, when you're doing your bulb ordering, have a look at the catalogues and see what they say on them. So if you want tulips in April, go for the early ones. If you want to have some at the end of April, beginning of May, go for the mid-season ones. And if you're wanting your tulips to carry on through towards the end of May, then go for those late season varieties. So it does completely depend on where you live. So I live in the Scottish borders, and that's zone 8B. And for me, tulips, I will never get them in March here. I am really pushed to get them at the beginning of April, and that does involve forcing them and bringing them indoors. And I can extend my season quite late into May, mid-May, even towards the kind of 20th of May time, because we can sometimes have really cool springs here, and then the tulips are later. But if you lived in the south of England, for example, where it is warmer, the chances are that your tulips will come out earlier at the beginning of April for you, and they'll be done by the beginning of May. So it does really depend on where you live as well, but you can tweak it by buying these early, mid and late season varieties just to give yourself the best chance of a good number of weeks of flowering. Finally, the temperatures have gone down. It's been really wet for a few weeks and quite warm still, so it's been too early to plant the tulips. Tulips like a period of cold, and they don't like sitting in wet, soggy soil. So I've just waited and held off until just now to start planting them. So we're going to have a look today at how I am doing this. And I am starting to plant my tulips in a few different ways so that I can get a good succession of flowers through those spring months. So I'm going to plant some outside in the garden, and they will flower for me from April through to May, right to the end of May sometimes if it's not too hot. I'm also going to plant some in containers and pots because they are fantastic for having some earlier tulips. I can have them outside so they get that period of cold, but I can bring them into the greenhouse to get them blooming that little bit earlier. So that extends my season and means that I can get some tulips in April as well, especially if it's quite a harsh winter. It's good to be able to bring them into the greenhouse and get them warmed up a little bit and to bring them on. So two lots of ways of planting tulips, and we'll have a look at those just now. So outdoors in the flower patch, I grow my tulips in trenches, and this is a trench that I have dug in the flower patch that is about 3 foot wide, and it is about 5 inches deep. So you're looking to plant the bulbs 2 to 3 times their depth, so you need to make sure you've dug low enough that they will be able to have a good covering of back soil on top of them, and you can mulch on top of that with some compost as well. So this has been weeded out, this bed, and it's been dug out as a trench, and it's all ready now for bulb planting. I've already written my labels because that's just helpful for when you plant your tulip bulbs. You can pop them in at the same time, and then you're not going to lose track of which bulbs are where in the garden, because you'll never remember in the springtime. So I'm going to plant all the varieties of tulip that are going to come out roughly the same time in the same place. So I'm going to have tulip beds in different places, but the ones that are going to come out at the same time, so for example all my mid-season varieties, I'm going to plant in one bed, and then I'll plant my early ones in a different place and my late ones in a different place as well. And that just makes sure that when I'm harvesting, I'm not running all over the garden to different flower beds, using up lots of time and energy to do that. I'm going to be able to harvest them all in one place and just work my way down one bed at a time. That's the idea anyway, and let's see in the springtime if they do come out all at the same time. So I'm planting my tulips pointy end up like this, so pointy end up and the root end down. And they can be planted really close together, so like eggs in a carton, so they can be put little tiny space between them, but they could even be even closer than that really, as long as they're not touching. So you could plant them as close as that. And this just allows us to plant a lot of bulbs in a small space, because these tulips are going to be a one cycle flower only. So when I am harvesting them, I will not cut the stem, I will pull the entire flower up, bulb and all, and then the bulb gets discarded. And the reason we do this is so that we can get the longest stems possible for floristry, and also tulips tend to not flower quite as well in subsequent years, so you'll not quite get the stem length and the quality of flower that you would that first year. So as a flower farmer, you're going for top quality and you're going for really long stems. So that's why we discard the bulb and we pull the whole thing up, and it also allows us to replant very quickly in the same bed again once the tulips are over. And so, because we are not wanting them to naturalise and be perennial tulips, we can plant them that bit closer together. And planting them closer together also means as well that it encourages the tulips to grow up as long, straight stems and are nice and upright for us. So it normally takes a good few weeks to get all the tulip bulbs planted around the other jobs that need doing, because at the same time as planting dahlias, you're also planting other bulbs such as alliums and irises and muscari and narcissi, and also you're lifting the dahlias and storing them for winter at the same time, as well as thinking about Christmas wreaths and making up those orders. So one of the things that I'm doing with my tulips this year is I'm planting them in a new bed, so a different one to where I planted the tulips last year. And the reason that I'm doing this is to prevent a disease called tulip fire, which can just rapidly spread through all your tulips and can destroy an entire crop. And unfortunately, this did happen to me a couple of years ago, and it is heartbreaking because you spend a lot of money on the tulip bulbs, you spend a huge amount of time digging trenches and planting them and looking after them, and then wanting to harvest them for your bouquets and for your florists and your weddings, and then you lose them all. So we want to do whatever we can to prevent that from happening. And one of the main things that you want to do is you want to plant your tulips in a new bed each year, rotate them round, because tulip fire can't come again in the same bed. So if I was to plant tulips where I'd had tulip fire the previous year, the chances are I would get tulip fire the next one. So you don't want to plant tulips in the same bed as one that you had tulip fire for 3 years. So last year I chose a new bed, this year I'm choosing a different new bed, and I'll keep rotating them around, and eventually, several years down the line, once at least 3 years have passed, I'll be able to plant tulips back in that original bed. So rotating your beds just keeps your bulbs and your plants healthy, and hopefully means that it's going to increase our chances of having a really good harvest of tulip flowers in the spring with no disease. So when you're planting your bulbs, just check when you're going through the packets and you're planting them out that there aren't any ones that have gone mouldy or are a bit squishy. You want nice, hard, firm, healthy looking bulbs. So these are a couple I've picked out just now that are squishy to touch, and they are covered in a little bit of mould, and I don't want to put them in with the others in the bed in case they do have any kind of disease or fungus that they can spread amongst the other healthy bulbs. So we're going to discard these. There's always the odd one or two like that maybe have a little bit of mould on them or are just disintegrating away. But the large majority, if you've got a good supplier of bulbs, the large majority should be absolutely fine when you come to plant them. So these are all nice, hard, firm bulbs that I've got here, so they are great for planting. So these tulips can all get backfilled with soil round about them now, and a good couple of inches on top. And then if it's dry, water them in, and then they should just sit growing their roots down over the winter time. They need a good period of cold, 12 to 16 weeks of good cold weather, which we're lucky here in Scotland we generally get in most winters, and that helps them to flower really well in the spring. So that's them all covered in their soil now, and it means that they can be left now over the winter. There's nothing else that we need to do with them. If you're in a really dry place at this time of year with not much rainfall, you could water them in, but I get a lot of rainfall, so I know I don't need to do that. They're all labelled as well so that I know which tulips are in which areas of bed, and that will really help when it comes for cutting for my florists and telling them which varieties I have in bloom on that particular week. The other thing to say as well is that my flower patches are all fenced round. They've got high areas of fencing to keep out the rabbits, which is the main culprit for digging up bulbs where I am, so they should be quite safe from that. So back in the garden again today and digging out another trench to put some more tulip bulbs into the ground. So these are going to be early tulips that are going in here. So they'll be the first to flower in April next spring. So the tulip bulbs that I've been putting in here this morning are all candy prints, purple prints and white prints. So these will all come out in April, and I'm really impressed this year from the quality of bulbs I've been getting from Boston Bulbs Wholesale, and I haven't found any at all in this batch today out of the 3 bags that I've had that have been mouldy or soft, so that's good. They're all good quality tulips and hopefully will provide some really nice flowers in the spring. So these bulbs are all going to get covered up now with several inches of soil on top, and then we'll just leave them until the spring and look forward to seeing lots of lovely flowers then. So that's those tulips all finished and in, and it's been a lot more chilly doing that job this morning because it froze overnight last night. The temperatures have dipped down, so it's proper tulip planting weather now, but it's definitely a lot colder doing it. So time to go in now, get a hot cup of tea and some lunch before we start the next batch afterwards. So as well as planting out the tulip bulbs into the flower patches in the garden, I'm also planting some tulip bulbs in crates. And these crates are fantastic. They've been donated by our local greengrocers here in Peebles, and they're the perfect size and depth for fitting a lot of tulip bulbs in. So in these crates I'm fitting about 45 tulips in each one. And I'm putting a layer of newspaper on the bottom of the crate, then putting about a couple of inches of good quality compost from the garden on the bottom, laying my tulip bulbs pointy end up on them, and then after that they get a covering of a good several inches of compost and then labelled again. And these get watered if they're going to go inside the greenhouse, or if I know it's going to be raining and they're left outside, then I'll leave them just to the rainfall to soak them in. So usually at this time of year, when it's before Christmas time, I will leave the crates outside in the cold where they can grow away quite happily. And I'm going to protect them as well with just some chicken wire or garden trellis over the top to keep out any animals from digging up the bulbs, because this is an area around my greenhouse where it's not fenced off and they're not protected, and we do get a lot of rabbits in the garden. And when it gets towards March time, April time, I can then bring the crates inside if I want to, if I'm wanting to force for earlier flowers. If I'm quite happy that I don't need them at that particular time, I can leave the crates outside. But that's the beauty of using the crates, is that you can move them around to get your tulips to flower when you want them to. And that has been fantastic when I've been doing wedding flowers in the past. And it'll be really good as well for when I am working with florists and they maybe are looking for a particular variety of tulip on a particular week, and I can then move them around and encourage them to flower for that period of time. So as well as using the crates from the greengrocers for planting tulips, I also use my 10-litre pots as well, and you can fit a good 15-16 tulips into these 10-litre sized pots. And again, it's the same principle, just an inch or so of compost on the bottom, then pointy end up my 15-16 tulip bulbs go in, and then cover them over with several inches of compost. And these are great because they're really easy to lift and move around, they're not too heavy. So very early on in the season, I might be able to just do a few bouquets for customers. And by planting tulips in pots like these, I can have a few different varieties, different colours I can put together for a bouquet. And I can move these around in the greenhouse and get them to come on and flower early. And that's really quite useful for Mother's Day as well. If I'm trying to get flowers for Mother's Day. Sometimes Mother's Day is far too early in the year. It's middle of March and that's just too early. And I rely on forced bulb baskets then for flowers. But some years it is later, and I can try and force my tulips to come out in pots like these in the greenhouse. So that just shows you a few of the ways that I plant my tulips here at Cloudberry Flowers for cut flower bouquets and also for florists. And this year I'm aiming to get in 3,700 tulips if I can. And come the spring, that will give me plenty to work with, lots and lots of different varieties for my florists, and enough for me to do some retail bouquets as well. I hope you enjoyed today's video looking at my tulip planting. It's great to have got some of them in the ground now. I'm going to have to keep on going for the next week or two because we've got thousands of tulips to plant out. And I'm really hoping for a really good display next spring for my florists and for my local bouquets, and some to enjoy in the house for myself as well.